So I've been working with Angular for a little over 2 years now, and I'm really excited about the future of this framework. And that's why today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the history of Angular, how we got from Angular 1 to Angular 2, what's new in Angular 2, why you may want to upgrade, and what that upgrade path may look like. I'm going to assume that you have a little bit of Angular familiarity. If not, hopefully you can still get something from this presentation. The initial version of Angular was released back in 2009. It was originally developed by Miško Havery at Brat Tech LLC. He's actually still a part of the Angular team today. It's something that Angular progressed from his project to be an open source, and then it was picked up by Google. So now it's an open source project primarily maintained by Google and by the open source community. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that Angular was not actually developed initially for developers. It was intended for designers to create quick HTML forms. So that's kind of the architecture, the base architecture that the rest of Angular 1 was built on top of. So as it became more popular and more people started using it, and the Angular team started adding more and more functionality to the framework, they kind of added on top of that initial architecture that wasn't really developed to be performant or something easy for developers to use. It was more just for designers. So it was a little bit of a limiting foundation, and that was part of the motivation to move into Angular 2. So I touched on performance. One thing so back in 2009, just to give you a little bit of context, that's back when the iPhone 3GS was the hot new device. So it was really at the beginning of the mobile revolution. So performance wasn't really considered for these mobile devices. So that's part of the motivation for upgrading to Angular 2. Also, ease of use. There's a lot of difficult syntax and there's a learning curve. So the Angular team really wants to help developers to be able to transition onto this new technology quickly. And the changing web. So over time, technology is moving really quick. We have new types of JavaScript. We have new frameworks and libraries such as React, Ember. We have web components. We have modern browsers. We have transpilers to take code to work on those modern browsers, mobile devices. We have all kinds of stuff is changing in our industry. And with all these changes, the Angular team really wanted to look at the foundation and formulate some themes moving forward with what they wanted with Angular 2. And what they came up with was simplicity. They wanted it to be simple to develop an application. They wanted the framework to be flexible. They wanted it to be consistent syntax. They wanted people to be productive. And they wanted it to be fast. Fast meaning fast for development and fast for the end user who's using the product. And with these themes, they took a step back and they looked at Angular 1 and they realized that they couldn't use the existing framework. So that's where Angular 2 was born. Angular 2 is a complete rewrite. Breaking changes, you can't just take the new Angular 2 framework, drop it into your existing project, rip out Angular 1, and expect it to work. There's going to be some time and some effort to be able to make this upgrade process work. I was lucky enough to go to NGConf last year where the Google team and the core Angular team was there talking about Angular 2, and one of the things that really struck me was they wanted feedback from the community. They really wanted to make this for the community. Angular 1 was built more for Google to use. This is for everyone else to use. So they really wanted feedback. They are making migration guidelines. They're going to continue support for Angular 1 while people are still using it. And they're really taking what we want and trying to incorporate it back into the project. So a lot of you may be asking, okay, Angular 1's working for me. Why would I even want to take the time to upgrade? One of the big things is performance. We touched on that a little bit with mobile, but change detection is up to 10 times faster in Angular 2. This is utilizing something called Zone.js. So Zone.js is really good at looking at the entire component tree of your Angular project, watching the asynchronous tasks that it's making, and knowing when to update the UI and the model and all the components accordingly when those asynchronous tasks finish. So if you've been working with Angular, you may have found that sometimes your model doesn't update in the view, and you have to kind of hack Angular to call scope.apply to force it to redraw itself. and something that can be kind of frustrating and doesn't really feel right while you're developing. Well, that's no longer going to be a thing with Zone.js. Also, caching views. Angular 1 didn't really cache views, and this is really important. So the initial time to load the page may be constant, but when you go back to that same page, it'll load faster because it's doing more caching on the client side. And this is huge for mobile devices, and they're really taking a mobile-first approach. If the Angular team thinks that if they can develop something that runs well on a mobile device, it'll also run well on the desktop. And they also really wanted to help out with the development process. So consistent modern syntax, directives are probably one of the hardest things to learn in Angular 1. So they really simplified what directives are in Angular 2. There are actually 3 different kinds of directives now, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. Scope, you don't have to kind of force scope to work, and you're more binding to the controllers and components rather than the scope itself. And in the future, once you do upgrade, there could be some more advanced capabilities such as server-side rendering or native mobile UI. So it should be clear kind of like how we got here, why you may want to upgrade, but what else has changed? ECMAScript 6. So this is the new version of JavaScript. You may also hear it referred to as ES6 or ES 2015. There's a little bit of a debate right now what it should be called. But this provides new functionality such as arrows, classes, promises, a lot of things that you may already be using in your projects, but you have to pull in from another library. Well, with ES6, it's right out of the box that you can use. So Angular 2 doesn't use ES6 directly. It uses TypeScript. TypeScript is a superset of ES6. So everything that you get in ES6, say you have an ES6 project, you change your JavaScript files to TypeScript files, it'll work right out of the box. And what TypeScript provides is this extra functionality. So you may get things like optional static typing. So you can kind of force, at compile time, the compiler to know, okay, this function here, it's expecting a parameter of this type. And if it's not of that type, then break at compile time rather than break it at runtime. So that's one of the big benefits. Actually, one thing that's really cool is that you're writing, for browser support, you have a transpiler that will actually take the ES6 code and make it go backwards compatible to something that will run on any browser. So this is kind of a graph of ES6 support across browsers right now. You'll see that it's pretty red. And the browsers are trying to keep up, trying to increase their capabilities to align with these new standards. But what a transpiler does is that it takes your code, it makes it backwards compatible to work with the older standards. So you write with the new future standards in mind, but when it actually gets to the browser, it'll be something that works for the end user. And that's, so you may be familiar with transpilers such as Babel. Well, with TypeScript, it's actually built in, so you can actually use it right out of the box. Directives, I mentioned you have 3 new directives. There are components, decorators, and template directives. So a component directive would be your typical view with the controller. If you want to target like an element in your DOM, you'll have a selector, and you'll say, okay, whenever you find this selector, I want to put this template where that selector is. And I'll show you that in a minute. A decorator directive, that would be more of a, you have an existing element, you want to search for it by an attribute and add some new functionality based on that attribute. So an example of that in Angular 1 would be ng-show. So you're looking for a div, for example, with the ng-show attribute, and you'll either show it or hide it based on the model. And also a template. So a template directive will give you reusable HTML that you can choose how you want it to go into the DOM. So an example of this from Angular 1 would be ngIf or ngRepeat, where you have this reusable DOM or reusable component that for ngRepeat you could maybe put it into the DOM 10 times. With dependency injection really starts to take advantage of annotations. This is something that's new with ES6, so it's really easy to take a class and inject it into a different class that you create. It's really easy to create new instances of this. So another problem with Angular 1 is that a lot of times you'll find singletons all over the app. This should really help to alleviate the singletons and lazy loading. Angular will be smarter now about when it injects these dependencies so that it won't all happen when the page first loads. You may not need a service until future, so it'll help to boost performance that way. And so an example of a component directive that uses this dependency injection, you can see this top class here, shopping list service. It's marked with the annotation of injectable, meaning that it can be injected as a dependency into another class. So here's my app. This is the component directive, as you can see with the component annotation. It looks for an element with that CSS selector, and then for the view that it will put in, it can grab it from this HTML file, or it can just do it in line like you would expect. And this is part of TypeScript, where you can say, okay, I want to pass in the shopping list service and enforce it to be of type shopping list service. So this is a really simple example, and I know I'm going through it quick, but you can see that this syntax for a directive and injecting a different dependency is a lot cleaner and a lot more straightforward than you would have with an existing Angular 1 directive. Data binding, change detection is a lot faster with Zone.js. Performance really starts to increase as you throw in immutable data and observables. And also there's two-way data binding versus unidirectional data binding. If you've been following the Angular team, this was actually a really big debate. Half the team didn't want two-way data binding, half the team did. And I know a lot of people really love two-way data binding. And in the beta release, you'll actually see that the team listened to the community, and the community wanted two-way data binding, so they added it in there. But if you want to do unidirectional data binding or like one time, you can really boost your performance that way with saying, okay, I want the value right at the start, but then I don't care. So stop watching that model. Okay, so I went through a lot there, and I know it's a lot to take in, and you're probably wondering, okay, this is great, or maybe you're not, but how can I upgrade? So the timeline, the Angular 2 beta was released back in December, so you can go out to the website now, grab it, start playing with it. Angular 1.5 was actually just released about a week and a half ago, so that's really kind of an incremental step to structure your app more like an Angular 2 project while you're still in Angular 1. So that could be part of your upgrade plan. And they haven't announced the official release yet, but expect mid to late December. There are multiple approaches that you can take for upgrading. So there's the big bang approach to do everything all at once, or you could do more of an incremental update. And I imagine incremental is the direction more people would take. So there are different ways to do that. You could upgrade to Angular 1.4. Angular 1.4 actually provides you with the new router that's available in Angular 2, and they backported it to Angular 1.4. So you could incrementally upgrade to Angular 1.4 and upgrade all of your routing all at the same time, which will then feed directly into Angular 2. Angular 1.5, that will give you more of the structure. NG upgrade and NG forward, these are really two of the cool things that you can do. So NG upgrade, both these are officially supported by Google. NG upgrade allows you to download both frameworks at the same time and pick and choose pieces of your app that you want to upgrade. So maybe you have a big scrolling table that is less performant. Maybe you just want to upgrade that first so that you can get the performance benefits, but you can still incrementally update your app in an agile style and kind of release it out. So NG Forward is a very lightweight library that you can download, and it allows you to write your Angular 1 app with Angular 2 syntax. So you can have the syntax of Angular 2, and it will compile back into Angular 1. And I have links to documentation on both of these if you're interested. So some of the resources that you can use, you can go out to the Angular website, the Angular blog. They're always posting news. And also John Papa's style guide. If you aren't familiar with that from Angular 1, you probably should be, because that's where all the best practices are, and also the documentation for those two libraries that you can include. So thank you. I hope you were able to take something from this presentation. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.